I don't want to overreact because it was just a preseason game, but Justin Fields' performance against the Cleveland Browns on Saturday should put the rest of the NFL on notice.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully every day here in the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by BriteCo Jewelry and Watch Insurance. BriteCo brings you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5 a month. Check out your special offer for Locked On listeners and get covered in under 2 minutes at brite.co/locked on. That's brite.co/locked on. On the show today, a big performance from Justin Fields against the Cleveland Browns, redemption for his first career start against the Cleveland Browns last season, and really putting on a show. Showing out in a way that both puts the rest of the NFL on notice and also, I think, both answers some questions about his performance and about his development, and also, I think, shows us some really real progress in ways that we've been looking for. And this longer opportunity against the Browns really opens some things up. So we'll talk about some of the bigger picture, why that performance matters, even though it's the preseason, without overreacting to it completely. We'll also look more specifically at a few different plays that really highlight a lot of what we saw from Justin Fields and why so much of that will be applicable to the regular season and beyond. And then we'll wrap up looking at some of the other takeaways from the game and how the performances we saw on Saturday will shape this Bears 53-man roster cutdown process. Well, tomorrow is the deadline, but really today and tomorrow. We have to start with Justin Fields because this felt like almost as much of a coming out party as you can have in a preseason game. You know, we knew the Bears were going to play this offense, well, the quote-unquote starting offense, for an extended set of snaps. They had originally said all the way up till halftime, but 3 touchdowns later, they said, you know what? Good enough. We've seen everything we wanted to see and more. And that's really what it was for Fields. I mean, when you go through the first 2 touchdown drives, the only incomplete pass was the one he threw away while he was under pressure. It wasn't really, there was no intended receiver. So on every throw on the first 2 drives where he was actually throwing it to a receiver, it was accurate, caught, and essentially 100% completion percentage. Again, just the one incompletion when he wasn't trying to complete it to anyone. That alone stands out on its own, but you can't just box score scout Justin Fields in the preseason. To me, it was the types of throws that he was able to make in certain situations, and the whole circumstances, the whole context is the word I was looking for there, of what went into this offensive performance. Understanding that, yes, some of the context is preseason football. Some of the context is the defense isn't game planning for him. Some of the context is, yes, no Jadeveon Clowney, no Myles Garrett, not a full-strength Cleveland Browns defense that he was throwing against. And we don't even know yet exactly how good this Cleveland Browns defense will be when it is full strength. But some of the other context on the other side to balance that out is the Bears weren't fully game planning for a Cleveland opponent. The Bears were not at full strength with their offense. We didn't see a ton of Darnell Mooney even across those first few drives. Obviously no Byron Pringle, no Velus Jones in this game. Still working through some different combinations there of pass catchers he was going to. Like he hit Dante Pettis for a touchdown, and Dante Pettis on a couple of nice plays, like 3 or 4 catches across those scoring drives. I mean, it's wide receivers that are going to be 5, 6, 7, and 8 on this Bears preseason depth chart against mostly Browns starters in the secondary. And it was within, the context of certain plays, right? There were a number of like medium to long down and distance passing situations. There was one after a penalty, I think that was like first and really long that he hit and picked up most of the yards he was missing. There were multiple 3rd and 7, 8, 9 plus yards where he was able to find open receivers and make completions and keep the drives going. And then, of course, in the red zone and in the end zone, I guess most of the touchdowns were just outside of the red zone, but in that sort of money territory, putting the ball on target accurately in the end zone, exactly where it needed to be on some really nice passes, all accumulated to Justin Fields in rhythm, showing us progress and development. I mean, so much of it, you go back and watch, it's in his eyes. If you can follow his helmet where it's working across the field, he'll on multiple, I think on the first 2 touchdowns, not the Cole Kmet one where Kmet was wide open, but the first 2 touchdowns, like he's dropping back to pass and he's looking right and then looking middle of the field, and he knows what his option is going to be on the left side of the field, and then comes to that at the end of the play to hold safeties where they are and step in and deliver. The footwork, much, much improved. Getting his feet aligned with where the ball is going to go, that sort of his shoulders and his feet are vertical, and the direction that his body is facing is where the ball is going to go, and really aligning it from feet, I was going to say from head to toe, but really from toe to head across the board. It just felt like mechanical improvement, comfort in the offense, confidence mixed with the natural talent that Justin Fields already bring. This feels like it's all of that came together in this preseason game in a way that, not that he's going to then do that every week in the regular season and light the league on fire as a top 5 quarterback this season. No, there's some really real reasons why, yes, it's the preseason, and that this was maybe an easier set of circumstances for Justin Fields to thrive in than it will be in the regular season. But it looked to me like affirmation of and definitive proof of, you give Justin Fields time to throw and a coaching staff and play calls that suit his skill set, and he is definitively a good quarterback who can help you win football games and put together a very effective offense. This game to me looked like proof of concept. If you can get everything else to work around him, he can do it, and he can be exciting doing it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this evolves in the regular season, the challenges that are going to come with that. But I want to go more specifically some of the evidence to these ideas and go through a few plays in particular that stood out about Justin Fields before we turn to this 53-man roster and some of the different players outside of the quarterback that stood out in this game and that can shape how this final 53-man roster cutdown might just end up looking. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BriteCo. You ever seen those videos online where it's somebody getting down on one knee for their proposal and they drop the engagement ring and maybe it falls in the river, falls in the ocean, or they're, if they're on a helicopter, it falls off the helicopter, or if they're in a stadium or something, it falls down the stands. There have been plenty of examples where you go viral for something embarrassing like that. And our friends at BriteCo are here to protect you, not only for a potential engagement situation, but any of your jewelry. If you take your watch off and end up losing it, it gets stolen, whatever happens to it, your earrings fall off in the water, a necklace comes loose, BriteCo.com has the jewelry insurance that'll make sure you get a replacement for the full value of that jewelry. No matter if it's lost, stolen, or you can't figure out what happened to it, BriteCo is there for you. You don't want to be that guy, and you certainly don't want it all splattered over the internet if it happens to get caught on camera. Go to BriteCo, Brite.co/locked on. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. BRITE.co/locked on. This podcast is also brought to you by our friends at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, with a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the United States, Canada, and the UK. You can book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip, or if you want to have some real fun, you can get that classic or luxury car for a special event, a birthday or holiday, and go out in the town in style. Or, find an affordable economy cars. If you're on a budget and just need a vehicle and you want to get from A to B, simplest way possible. Maybe even test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it might fit in your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Super convenient, and every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. That's Turo.com. It was anything from boring from this Chicago Bears offense against the Cleveland Browns, especially those first 3 touchdown drives. And a few plays in particular stood out to me from that game. First of all, the first throwaway, the only incomplete pass that Justin Fields had on those first 2 scoring drives. He's dropping back in the pocket. There's some pressure from the right side of the line of scrimmage, but you can see like Fields does like a 3-step drop and he steps up like he's ready to throw it. And it's Dante Pettis in the slot running just a little quick underneath out. If I remember right, it was an empty backfield. It was David Montgomery at the far right wide receiver, Dante Pettis in the right slot, 3 receivers to his left. Supposed to just be a sort of a quick play to get rid of the ball. And it's Montgomery on the outside is just going vertical, just to clear out space on that right flat for Pettis to run a little speed out. But the route that Pettis takes, he does this little move and then kind of turns around, and you can tell Fields is stepping into the throw and takes his hand off the ball like he's ready to cock it, but Pettis is still finishing that move to get into that space. And to me, that felt like a prime example of how wide receiver and quarterback timing matter and why it can be tricky when you throw in, the 5th or 6th wide receiver on your depth chart because of injuries. And it's those little like half-second delay, and I thought he was going to be making his break, but he's not quite making his break yet. And if I had let go of the ball in that moment, it would have been too far in front of him or would have risked an interception or whatever it might have been. Fields was ready to lock and load, thinking the receiver would be out of his break at that point, but he wasn't, and he could feel it, and he held it and had to kind of look elsewhere. And that's when, on that same side, I think that's when Larry Borum and Tevin Jenkins had trouble picking up a stunt to that side, and the pressure came in Fields' face, and he tried to sort of get out of it and just threw it away incomplete. That to me was an example of still getting on the same page with a new receiver that's been specifically farther down on the depth chart, and also your right guard and right tackle still getting on the same page. Sort of the side note, as the game went on, I thought Jenkins and Borum played very well and settled in after that, in that early sort of struggle that they had getting on the same page. Again, noticeably not against Jadeveon Clowney or Myles Garrett. Still, I thought that first play illustrated some of the timing issues, but then he was able to sort of connect with Pettis and sort of get back on the same page timing-wise from there, because later on, I think it was the next drive, there was some comeback routes. There was a play where it was basically 2 receivers going to the flat and then some deep comeback routes. You run about 15, 20 yards downfield, turn around, and work your way back to the quarterback. And on one of those plays, he hits Dante Pettis for, 8, 9, 10, 11 yards. I can't remember exact number. And it's great timing for him to step back into his drop, gets to the top of his drop, steps into the throw, and fires as Pettis is turning around and making his break back to the quarterback. Because if he's late with that ball, then the cornerback has a chance to see Pettis working back and then attack that. Because, at that point, Pettis is not going to double move you. He's too deep downfield. He's made too much of a comeback. You know what route it's going to be. And if the ball is late, the cornerback can jump that or at least get in to make the pass breakup. But it was the perfect timing of stepping up in the pocket, having enough time for the routes to develop, and then being able to deliver that throw to a receiver who gets open by working his way back to the quarterback. Then, of course, there was the Dante Pettis touchdown. I think it was the second of the 3 touchdown passes Justin Fields threw. Another great route from Pettis and a great ball from Justin Fields, where Fields is dropping back, starts out looking right. And I think he had, Mooney and Kmet and a couple of the receivers on that right side, and Pettis was the only receiver to the left. Dante Pettis runs a double move where he starts going vertical, takes like 3 steps in on the post route, like he's going to break over the middle of the field. So the cornerback steps towards the middle of the field, a couple of steps to try and follow him as he goes across the middle. Then Pettis flips his hips quickly, breaks towards the sideline like a corner route. It's like a post corner, but he bends it a little bit flat to go towards the pylon, and Fields knows that's the route that's coming. And so as he's looking to his right, he can see what coverage it is. He sees it's cover 3. He knows then, as he's working his way back to the left, he knows, okay, if it's cover 3 on the right, it's going to be cover 3 on the left. And if it's cover 3 on the left, then that outside cornerback is basically going to be like man-to-man on Pettis when he's a single receiver over there. There's no number 2 receiver for him to have to keep an eye on. So when Pettis breaks to the inside, it is that cornerback's job to follow that wide receiver to the inside and leave his sort of zone, knowing that there can't be any other receivers coming back to that zone unless it's way later in the play that aren't the cornerback's responsibility. So he knows there's a good chance the cornerback is going to bite on that. So by the time he gets back to the left, his feet are already set to throw left before his helmet and his eyes get back left. You can see like he already knew where he was planning to go with the ball before he was ready to throw that ball. He still would have had time to change his mind, but you could tell he's getting advanced enough to work ahead and know, okay, going to get my feet set to throw left, even though I'm starting looking right, because I know by the time my eyes get left, my feet will already be there. And if my eyes confirm that the receiver is doing what I'm expecting him to do based on the coverage, he should be open. And it's a beautiful ball from Fields to the open space, right in stride, hits Pettis, inbounds, 2 feet, touchdown. I mean, that's adjusting with a receiver that you're not used to, and also just quick eyes going through your progression and having time to throw. That's the thing that I keep coming back to with this performance. Fields keeps showing you he didn't have to hold the ball for 4 seconds. He didn't need an excessive amount of time to throw. He just needed enough time to throw. It's not something he had a ton of last season. It's something that the offensive line was able to give him in this game. And it's something that if the offensive line can consistently give it to him throughout the regular season, this Bears offense can do some things. Again, not going to be top 5, not going to light up the NFL. You are lacking a little bit in receiving talent and overall weapon talent for Justin Fields, but it's most important for the development and evaluation of Justin Fields. They really have the potential here to do some great things. And we saw a very similar eye movement in the first touchdown to Ryan Griffin, the tight end, where that's a similar route, not the double move, but just a corner route. Fields is looking right, keeps the safety in the middle of the field, stuck in the middle of the field, because he has to make sure that Fields isn't going to go right, so he's a little bit slow to follow the tight end of the corner. He's beating people with his eyes. He's getting his feet in a better position. I thought his pocket presence was improved as well, and it's just littered throughout this tape. Yes, it's the preseason, but it's those sort of like foundational tools and development signs that we're looking for from Fields to then continue that in the regular season, presuming that the offensive line and supporting cast can keep up its side of the bargain, that he was able to do much better in this game than it had in either of the first 2 preseason games. I think playing a full half or playing extended drives, multiple drives into multiple quarters, gave Fields more time to get comfortable, get into a rhythm. They got some of the running game going as well. And it all sort of seemed to be, this is what it's supposed to look like. That's what the offense is supposed to look like. And if they can get to what it's supposed to look like enough in the regular season, they'll win a few more games, I think, than most of us are expecting. For now, they still have to figure out exactly what it's going to look like around Justin Fields. And so we'll take a better look at what this, not a full 53-man roster prediction, but some updates on some key position battles that are still going to be up in the air next on Locked On Bears. Whew. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to play daily fantasy, placing entries, all sorts of player projections, and getting a little bit more out of your Sundays, because you can sort of like get in on your different types of games and formats. You can get in a bunch of different entries. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their prize pick projections, you can win up to 10 times your money on entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the prize pick projections. And they've got projections on every sport you watch. That includes the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, soccer, WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball, cricket, and more. It's you against the house in your type of daily fantasy that you can't find anywhere else. You can make your entries in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's safe. There's fast withdrawals, and it's currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 when you enter in our promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. Last week, we went through a Bears 53-man roster prediction, a full one, noticeably before the last preseason game. That was intentional because I knew that today's podcast, immediately the first podcast after the game, we would want to talk about the game. And tomorrow's podcast on Tuesday is the day of the deadline. So by the time you listen to the podcast, they may already make their roster cut down, so it would be a little bit moot. So I wanted to get that in early as opposed to just trying to squeeze it in until right before the deadline, and it wouldn't last all that long. And so I did want to take a second to look at how what we saw in this game might influence that 53-man roster. And I think first and foremost, Dante Pettis secured himself a spot in this Bears wide receiver depth chart. And I'm curious if perhaps he will have fully taken Tajae Sharp's spot on this depth chart. I would guess when the first 53-man roster comes through, when they reach that deadline, they have to have their guys figured out. Perhaps both of them will be on the depth chart as number 5 and 6 receivers. It'll be Mooney, Pringle, Velus Jones, Equinemius St. Brown, and then Pettis and Sharp is 5 and 6. But then if another wide receiver from another team becomes available, I would think Pettis would get the keep over Sharp, who's just been injured. As well as he played in that preseason game and he's been a standout at practice, he's been injured since. And availability is an ability here. And if Pettis has been sort of, what have you done for me lately? Plus, Pettis has been the punt return guy they've been trying out quite a bit. And Tajae Sharp does not play special teams. That's a really big factor in this. And if you're going to be number 5 or 6 on the depth chart instead of number 2 or 3, that can be the difference. Maybe Sharp has shown him enough on offense that he's worth it anyway, but I think Pettis has fairly surely secured a spot on this 53-man roster. I also noticed just more generally, as much as Eberflus was saying before the game that, we want to play all our starters as much as the full first half, they rotated in a lot of backup defensive guys and wide receivers, like fairly early in that game to where, it was like half starters for a while there, and it wasn't really the full cast of starters. Like a prime position for that we struggled with on the 53-man roster prediction because it's just hard to separate the group is the defensive line, the backups in there. Against the Browns in this one, we saw Mike Pinnell in as the first guy off of the bench, the sort of the number 1 backup nose tackle for him ahead of, I think Tyrus Tonga might not have been available. I don't remember for sure how much Tonga we saw, but Pinnell got some extended snaps in there. Trevon Coley also got in there as a backup 3 technique. Both of those guys potentially pushing for 53-man roster spots here, and maybe that could have been enough after a third preseason game of putting them over the top. Certainly the Bears wanted to see more of them, so they got them in early to get a more full evaluation there. And we saw a similar thing at cornerback, the back end in that secondary. With no Jalen Johnson in this one, your starters were Kindle Vildor, as expected, but then Lamar Jackson continued to start as one of the top outside guys in the place of the injured starters. Presumably, Lamar Jackson likely has, if he started all 3 preseason games with the starter because of injuries, but still, that would mean he's your top backup, right? So presumably he's got a spot on this 53-man roster. They did make some rotations fairly early there and got Greg Stroman in there, a guy who hasn't really played much except mostly third string and occasional second string. He got in there with some of the other starters in this one, as did Devonta Harris, a guy who's been playing a lot of special teams, and I think he's a dark horse guy to maybe make the back end of this Bears 53-man roster. And cornerback is so tricky because the preseason is over now, and Thomas Graham did not play a single snap of preseason football. Don't know if he has even practiced at all. Tavon Young signed as a free agent slot cornerback from the Baltimore Ravens. Not a snap of preseason football. 0. Barely practiced, if at all. A couple other guys that haven't played at all. Roquan Smith, N'Keal Harry, Byron Pringle due to injury. And then Mario Edwards has also not played a single snap. Did not play a single snap of preseason football. Those were the 6 guys I was able to track down. That's not an official number just yet, but those are the 6 that I could point out that are still on the roster that didn't play any preseason football. Otherwise, at safety, Dane Cruikshank made his Bears debut. He was in at safety with DeAndre Houston-Carson. Still think he, as a veteran, established guy that they brought in, still think he's ahead of Hicks, who they drafted in the 7th round, and did play a lot in that game. They wanted to get a look at him, but I think safety is going to be very similar to running back, where the backup veteran, in this case, Dane Cruikshank, or at running back, Darrington Evans, are both ahead of the backup rookies, Treston Ebner and Elijah Hicks, at running back and safety. And so if they keep 4 safeties, I think the rookie Hicks won't make it. But they could keep 5 and keep both Cruikshank and Hicks. And same thing at running back. I think if they keep 3 running backs, it'll be Evans over Ebner, and Ebner goes to the practice squad. But they could just keep 4 and keep both of those guys as backup running backs. I think both of those positions are going to be in that way, where if they make a cut there, they're keeping the veteran, or they could just keep both. But I don't see a likelihood at either spot that they keep the rookie and just cut the veteran. Although Evans suffered an injury in this preseason game, and maybe that could change how the running back thing plays out. But when healthy, I think Evans and Cruikshank were ahead of Hicks and Ebner at their respective positions. And one other guy that got in on defense early, Jack Sanborn, the undrafted rookie free agent linebacker from Wisconsin, was out there in for Nick Morrow fairly early with a bunch of other starters on defense. Lock him in to your Bears 53-man roster. I think they love the kid and are not going to let him go at any point this season. That makes it tough then for the likes of Caleb Johnson and DeMarquise Gates, but we'll see exactly how many linebackers they end up keeping as depth, especially because Roquan had some hamstring tightness that kept him out of this one. I would imagine probably won't be an issue that lingers into the regular season, and perhaps if this had been a regular season game, I would bet Roquan Smith might have played in this one when it was all said and done. We still saw Riley Reif play with the second team offensive tackle. Seems like it's Larry Borum's job at this point. That as of now, I think we can expect Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum to start week 1 at right guard and right tackle, and that the veterans are going to be the backups. It's pretty miraculous. I mean, we'll see for sure when they take the field in week 1, but I don't know, once they signed Riley Reif and Michael Schofield, that would not have been my bet on how this offensive line played out. But the young kids have played well, and I think the Bears have a lot of incentives to say, even if Borum and Jenkins, even if they aren't as good as Riley Reif and Michael Schofield, what do you get? You do want the best offensive line for Fields, but you gain more value of trying to develop Borum and Jenkins by playing them than you do by just keeping them on the bench and starting the veterans for the sake of starting the veterans. I guess I would rather have the better offensive line for Fields as I think about it out loud, but I do see a lot of value of just saying, screw it, let's go with the young guys and live with some of their ups and downs, because they're going to develop more and advance as players more as starters on the field than they will as backups watching from the bench. I wonder if we'll see them take that approach at other positions as well, with young players versus starters, versus veterans, like Tavon Young, slot cornerback, versus, a guy like Kyler Gordon, of course, probably going to play the slot over him. And, we'll just kind of glance around. I think backup guys like Ebner and Darrison Evans, when you're number 3 running back and you're not on the field much anyway, they don't have to prioritize youth over veterans. But in terms of specific playing time, I bet Velus Jones gets more time than some of the other veterans, because you might as well play some of the younger guys at that position. So we'll see what exactly the Bears do with this 53-man roster. You can be sure we'll break down all the roster moves for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. That'll probably be on Wednesday after the initial roster on Tuesday, but we'll still have a Tuesday podcast for you as well. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep coming back for more daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis right here on Locked On Bears. We are your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. That includes your fantasy football team every day as well, with Locked On Fantasy Football. Vinny Iyer has been covering fantasy for over 20 years, and he'll give you the moves that the other players in your league won't have. So check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Then coming back tomorrow to Locked On Bears for another opportunity to bear down.